may I speak in the name of the one who loves us, the one who sustains us, and the one who gives life. Amen. So, the story of the tax collector and the Pharisee. If you listen, you might just hear the booing and the hissing of the baddies in the pantomime. The Pharisees, those self-righteous, legalistic, religious hypocrites. And as for the tax collectors, well, they're collaborators, furthering the cause of the powerful. You know, those cheats on the make at the expense of others. Although those of us who have sat in the pews for a while and who are familiar a little with the gospel stories might concede the need to think of tax collectors in a slightly different light. Jesus did eat with them after all. He called Matthew, a tax collector, to be his disciple. He looked up to Zacchaeus as he sat high in the tree. And in this parable, the tax collector does seem to be genuinely repentant, so perhaps they're not so bad. And anyway, much better to be a humble tax collector than a proud Pharisee. Boom. Do you hear the silence fall in this space? Because there we have it. Our efforts to position ourselves on the right side find us caught in a quandary. As the self-righteous Pharisee seeks to distance themselves from the tax collector, so we too find ourselves behaving in the same somewhat superior manner as we attempt to distance ourselves from the Pharisee as we aspire to be the tax collector. God, thank you that I am not like other people. Sometimes I caught myself saying it a bit like this. I'm all right, thanks. It's all them other people. Or perhaps you've heard it said, there but for the grace of God go I. I wonder this week, is it really God's grace that means that I was not one of those people in the back of the refrigerated container on a lorry? What a tangled and complicated mess is revealed as we discover that we are neither one nor the other, but both. Bound up together, we are Pharisee and tax collector. We are both migrant and resident, slave and free, sinner and saint. And how quickly we shift between the two. In an instant, we move from self-reliance and independence to throwing ourselves at the feet of God, throwing ourselves at God's mercy, asking God, where are you, God? Asking God to forgive us where we have fallen so badly short. Repentant tax collector. It's interesting, isn't it, that we like to focus on the repentant part. But remember, the tax collector had much to repent over, as surely do we. And there's much about the Pharisee that we ignore too as we zoom in on hypocrisy and self-righteousness. I wonder, how quickly do we dismiss the Pharisee's desire to take faith seriously? Even with the best of intentions, it seems that we end up diminishing others, setting ourselves apart in order to shore ourselves up. Doing that by rehearsing aloud our qualities and our strengths, or perhaps sometimes by outwardly martyrizing our inner unworthiness. Behaviours that are as true in churches as much as they are in individuals. You'll have seen those behaviours in ordinary life, on the street, in the shops, at school. Maybe you can recall occasions when you've joined in. I can. The eye rolling when someone else is talking. Dressing for success. Holding others responsible for our own shortcomings or disappointments. And here we are this morning with our inner tax collector and our inner Pharisee buried deeply within, aspects of ourselves which disconnect with the acceptable face that we are happy to project in public. It seems that the characters in this parable have much to teach us about ourselves, especially when we too this morning have come up to the temple to pray. Thankfully, like the Pharisee and the tax collector, you and I, we are all welcome in this place of God. I wonder what we might receive from being in this prayerful place. Well, as the parable teaches us much about ourselves, it also teaches us much about God. For the keeping of prayerful routines and practices of worship has many purposes. And one of those is to help us to shift our perspective away from ourselves and towards God. That this morning, through word and in silence and music and the sharing of bread and wine, an intimacy might be created whereby we are able to experience something of the merciful nature of God, and that convicted of our need for mercy, we might be humble before God, finding our right place, our right relationship among one another, as we dare to begin to live integrated and flourishing lives, even in the most challenging of circumstances. Theologian Stanley Hauerwas asks this question: have you ever known anyone who has successfully humbled themselves? Have you ever known anyone who has successfully humbled themselves? He suggests that humility happens to us. It is not something that we set out to achieve. For Hauerwas, there is no humility without humiliation. Not humility achieved as a result of coercion or control or power. No. In this place, when we come to pray, humility is the recognition of our acceptance of who we are in relation to our Creator. And I dare say that it is this attitude that makes righteousness possible. Though humiliation is often what we and the world thirst for as we long to see people taken down a peg or two, psychologists tell us that for humanity, humility is about emotional neutrality and an understanding that we no longer need to put ourselves above one another, nor below one another either, for everyone is our peer. Standing here in the pulpit, I might put it like this: that we are all worthy in the sight of God. What makes us worthy is that we are humbled in the sight of God, made worthy through the mercy and humiliation that is found when we simply acknowledge that we are who we are, tax collector and Pharisee, and God is God. A glimpse of holiness, a wholeness that makes it possible for us to be disciples of Christ. And so, as we celebrate the Eucharist today, we remember Christ's humiliation on the cross, the merciful God who makes it possible for us to gather around the table that we might be sustained through bread and wine. And I concede, in that very briefest of moments, we might just allow ourselves to thank God that we are not like other people. That as Christians, as followers of Christ, we are people who are brought to our knees, who are willing to bow our heads and to admit to what we are as we lift our faces to heaven, that we might begin to reflect what we shall be, as in God's presence we are transformed by the merciful humiliation of God.